Good morning, everyone. I'm hoping we're live. I know I hit the webinar button. So welcome to the October meeting of the board's Policy and Personnel Committee. We have one committee member who is going to join us by phone, Dr. Adam Block, but 2/3 of the committee is here, so we have a quorum and we're going to begin. I just want to see if I have any community members. We have one community member, just for the community who is here, who happens to be a board member, but in case others join and watch this later, we will take community comments at the end of the meeting. So Dr. Shields, I'll ask you to start off with the personnel update, please.
Yes, good morning, everyone. The personnel update that I wanted to share with you today is that on the instructional side of the hiring process, we have 2 vacancies that we're working on right now. We have, and they're both leave replacements. That's when a teacher needs to leave their current title for some reason. Sometimes it's because of medical, sometimes it's because they're having a child. We have to fill 2 positions. One happens to be a middle school social worker, and the other one is the elementary orchestra position that we're working on filling right now. So those hiring processes are underway, and I work closely with the building principals and sometimes the directors if they're involved, like they are with the orchestra position, to fill those positions. And as you see on the board agendas, trustees, those hires are appointed, in that section of the board agenda for you to approve as needed.
Okay, when we were last here, according to my notes, an offer was pending acceptance by one candidate for social worker. Am I to assume that offer was rejected?
So that offer was rejected. I have since made an offer to a new candidate who accepted it. You'll see that appointment on the next board agenda. The position that is vacant right now is a leave replacement. We had a social worker who was going out on an FMLA leave. So we're in the process of filling that. So it's different than the one that I was telling you about last month.
Okay, thank you. I guess I got my social workers confused.
No, that's okay. They were both social workers. One was a probationary position, which you'll see on the next agenda. And this one you would see in a future agenda, which is an FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act vacancy.
Thank you. And there were some civil service positions that were vacant at the time. How are we doing on those?
So Elaine Fennick continues to work on filling those positions. I saw yesterday she was giving a summary to the superintendent on those positions. So there's some clerical vacancies. There's some maintenance area vacancies, head custodian vacancy. Those are in the process of being filled. As you may be aware, those involve civil service appointments typically. So the central office staff here works closely with civil service to make sure we're appointing off of lists of eligibility to make sure the proper people are being given consideration.
Anything else?
That's all. Thank you.
Okay. And by the way, welcome Ms. O'Hara to your first Policy and Personnel Committee meeting. We enjoy having you. Okay. All right. Are we ready to go into agenda item 1.3 on the attendance policy? Okay.
So what you have in front of you is the policy that was shared with you last month. A follow-up for that policy was that I was to bring it back to the principals to get their input. I have shared it with all 7 principals and received their input. There were no changes to the draft that you reviewed last month. So if the committee finds this policy acceptable as is, the next step would be to put it on for a first reading.
Okay, thank you. I have a lot of questions about the draft that you provided. Nan, unless you have anything you want to say.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So first, thank you, Dr. Shields, for doing this. I had some minor things and then some more substantive questions. regarding the draft that you provided to us. And I understand you married the NISPA template with some of our pre-existing policy, for example, the 85% attendance. So I just wanted to go through that. So on the first page of the new, I'll call it the new blended policy, under the notice section, second bullet, parents will receive a plain language summary of this policy by mail. We've stopped mailing a lot of things to parents in an effort to reduce costs. So will this policy be sent by mail, or will it be sent by email, or do you want to lock ourselves into the fact that it will be sent by mail?
It's an interesting interpretation. So when I think of mail, I don't think of necessarily U.S. Postal Service only. I think of it as, sometimes it's electronic mail. We can refer to it as email. So I think we have flexibility in that. If you felt that some people would make an assumption on that, we can just make it, parents will receive a plain language summary of this policy at the start of the school year, and be silent on the vehicle in which we use.
But there are forms that are sent out by mail. And so, right, we do still use some mail.
Yep, we do. I don't
So
see
I
that this
think
one would have to be by mail, but
I agree, but I think I agree with you. Mail is mail. Like, you don't have to, it could be email.
Okay, I just don't want there to be any expectation that it's U.S. Postal Service mail, because in other places, in different policies, we actually say email or we say website. We're more specific. So that was that comment on that bullet. Because if you go to the next bullet, it says when a student is absent, tardy, or leaves early, blah, blah, blah. It says we will notify the student's parents by phone or email. So we're making a distinction.
Okay.
And I think that there should be consistency.
Okay, so my recommendation is that in bullet 2, we remove by mail, which it gives us flexibility.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that? Thank you. Okay. Then in bullet 3, it talks about when the student is absent or tardy without excuse, that the parent will be notified and be reminded of the attendance policy. I'm wondering, does it matter how many times the student is absent without excuse before this intervention happens? In other words, the first time if a student is absent without excuse, does that automatically trigger the call and the email to the parent, or does it have to be repeated unexcused absences, or does it matter within the policy?
I don't think the number matters. I think communication should be ongoing between the school and the family when there's an absence that's being registered. I can say that's been my experience as a parent in the district, that if I haven't sent in a note and my child's absent, I'm contacted by the house office or the grade level office.
Okay. I see Dr. Block has joined us. Dr. Block, where we're discussing the revised attendance policy. And so I have a bunch of questions that I have outlined after reading the draft that Dr. Shields provided to us. So we're on page 2 of that policy. Okay, so going down to the last bullet in that series that begins with the district will share this policy. ATED shouldn't have an apostrophe. It shouldn't be ATED apostrophe S. So throughout, if we could just delete the apostrophes, please. Okay. All right, the next part was under excused and unexcused absence. We didn't, on our old policy, we had as an excused absence, doctor or dental appointments, which cannot be arranged for any other time. And that was dropped in the synthesis of the new policy with the old policy. Was that purposeful? Or should doctors and dental appointments, should that bullet from the old policy be included as an excused absence?
I believe that was inadvertently dropped. I think it should be in this policy.
Okay, so will you please add that in the menu of excused absences?
Yep.
Okay, that's that note. I'm trying to read my scribble. Our old policy also had a bullet at the very end of the menu that said, other reasons subject to building principals review. Do we want to include that as well?
I believe we do have language in there that says, or such other reasons as may be approved by the appropriate building administrator.
You do
Including
have
but
that, I'm
not-
sorry. Yes,
Including but not limited to absences due to circumstances related to homelessness. It's in the bottom of paragraph 1.
great, okay. Thank you for that. Okay. Then under general procedures / data collection, the last bullet that begins with continuous monitoring will be conducted. Okay. The
Yep.
second sentence says a student will be considered chronically absent if they miss 10% or more of the school year. Satisfactory attendance is missing 5% or less. So elsewhere in the policy, we talk about the 85% rule. And I wasn't sure how the sentence I just read, that they're considered chronically absent if they miss 10% or more, which would take them to 90%, as opposed to the 85% rule. And I didn't know if those two concepts needed to be rectified or reconciled with each other or made clear. Is our policy that they're chronically absent if they miss 10% as opposed to 15%?
Deborah, where is the 85%?
The 85% is further on in, let me find it. It is on the top of page 4 of the new draft. And it begins the Port Washington.
I see it. Yeah, so those should align, huh? You're right.
Well, that's my question, Dr. Shields, that to me, there's inconsistency there. And I realized that the language in the last bullet, the continuous monitoring bullet, was lifted from the NISPA template. But later on, we talk about the fact that we're an 85% threshold.
Yeah, so I can make 2 recommendations. So from my perspective, the 85% is like a minimum in especially that has been longly established by our high school coursework that is credit bearing, right? So, and that's been a long-standing practice at the high school. And in my conversation with Dr. Pernick, he does not want to change that in either direction. So I think the statement here is that 10% is considered a high amount of absence. If you wanted to change the 10 to 15% so it's in alignment, I can understand that.
Well, as a practice in the last, could you please mute? I'm hearing, I think, and Nan also, I'm not sure where the echo is coming from. Thank you. In the bullet where it says a student will be considered chronically absent if they miss 10% or more, and that satisfactory attendance is missing only 5%. Is that true for our school district? That historically they're considered chronically absent if they miss 10%?
So there's no like classification in that sense that you're talking about, but it's considered a high threshold to be missing 10% of your schooling, and 15% would be an even higher threshold.
So how would you suggest, as a practice and practical matter, these, to me, they're inconsistent. Do you see the inconsistency, or is there a way to make this more clear? Because in one case we're saying you're chronically absent if you miss 10%, and in the other we're saying at the high school you have a problem if you're missing 15%.
Right. So I think I said earlier, my recommendation would be, if you want to have those two numbers in alignment, this should be 15%. But I think what we're saying philosophically is that missing more than 10% is considered something that we should be concerned about. So to me, this statement is saying that at 10%, we're seeing too high a level of absenteeism. And when we're talking about the 15% at the high school, now we're talking about failure of a course.
Okay.
So I see them as two different thresholds. So I could be comfortable with both sets of language staying in place. But if you'd rather align the 10 and the 15, I think we need to go to the 15.
Well, personally, I understand your point, that the student should not miss more than 10% of the school year. And then when it gets to the 15% at the high school, there's an additional consideration. So I personally, now that you have explained it to me, I'm personally comfortable with leaving this bullet the way it is. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add. Any other comments? Nan?
I would just wonder if whether or not we need specifics of the 10 and the 5 at that point, and maybe just make it more general language that issues with attendance are continually monitored, or something to that effect.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean, because we do say throughout here that attendance is monitored.
So then I'm just wondering if the language of the 10 and the 5 are going to be confusing with the 85 listed as well, that maybe we just take out the specifics of the 10 and the 5 in that bullet.
I think what this section is trying to do is to send a message to parents that, 5% is tolerable, but 10% becomes more problematic. I think that's the tone that's trying to be set in this bullet.
Yeah, I'm going back now that I keep reading the first sentence, that we expect all students to be in attendance not less than 18%. I think we need to be consistent. I mean, I understand that 10% is aspirational, but I think we need to be consistent and say the student will be considered chronically absent if they miss 15% or more of the school year.
Okay.
But I'm not the dictator.
I agree, Deborah. I think, or I would just eliminate that line completely. As to Nanette's point, student, you could just say continuous monitoring will be conducted to identify students who are absent, tardy, or leave school satisfactory. And then you could just leave, if a pattern of ATIDs for an individual student is identified, a designated staff will follow up. And then later on, you do talk about the 85% rule. I just think but you could just eliminate it or put in the 85, because then when you do 85, then does it stay to 5%, like missing 5%? So I personally, I think the point is we're monitoring attendance and that we should kind of give a little discretion and let's move on from this.
Okay, so the sentence you would remove is a student will be considered chronically absent if they miss 10% or more of the school year.
And satisfactory attendance is missing 5% or less. I mean, I don't know. I don't think, do we need that? Like, don't we? I mean, do we give attendance? Oh, we do give attendance awards. Doesn't Weber still do the perfect attendance at the award ceremony?
No, we stopped doing that.
Oh, then we don't need it anymore. If we're not giving perfect attendance awards, then, that was the one award my daughter got. Come on, Dr. Shields.
As we're living through a pandemic, we're trying to not have people striving for perfect attendance if they have any ailments.
Yeah, I would eliminate those 2 lines.
Dr. Shields, are you comfortable with eliminating the 2 lines?
Yeah, I'm fine
An
with that.
administrator and
Yeah.
former teacher?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we'll take those 2 lines out. Okay, and we will move on. In the next section, online distance remote learning, it's just that there's a funny space between platform and email in the middle of that paragraph, so we could just jigger that a little bit. The next section on the NISPA template was entitled Attendance Incentives. And that's completely missing from what I could see in our draft, unless there was something incorporated elsewhere. And my only question is, while I am against incentives like contests and bicycles and things like that, it says that the district is required, in the note on the NISPA template, it says, the district is required by state regulations to include incentives to encourage student attendance in its policy. So we've taken out the incentive section, and I don't know how this admonition, I don't know what else to call it, by NISPA reminding us that we're required by state regulation to include some type of incentive to encourage student attendance. I don't know how we balance that with not wanting to give candy and bicycles and things like that, or the awards. So I don't know if this has to go back to Howard Miller to say, how do we make sure we're complying with the regulation? I don't know whether incentive is you learn more, or you get to be with your friends, or you will do better in school, or I don't know what language we need to include in our policy in order to comply with the regulation. So that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, when I reviewed the policy with Mr. Miller, he was very comfortable with eliminating that section, but I understand your question as you're referring to the notes provided by NISBA. So I can ask him that question.
Thank you. And obviously we don't want to, the weekly lottery drawings, all that stuff. I can completely understand why he wouldn't want that in there. And I know I didn't when we were discussing this, I think last year, but my sense is there needs to be some kind of language in there. So maybe he knows how to handle that. I thought I saw Mr. Block. Where did he go?
Yeah,
oh, there he is.
yeah.
Dr. Block.
Yeah, so you can, to me, this regulation from the state reads pretty flexibly. And I think that we are all thinking the same thing, which is that the kid who is out one day and wants an incentive to get perfect attendance, so they go into school when they have a little cold, especially in a time of COVID. We do not want to create an incentive for that. However, I think we should be loosely open to the kid who is at the 15% mark or above that, and create a, so just for a subset of people that are, have a lot of absences, potentially limited to the junior high school or high school level, where it's the student has more control over whether they're absent or not, you can create an improvement. And if, Mr. Miller is comfortable with something, with doing very little or nothing, but we feel like we have to adhere to the regulation to the letter, we could just do some kind of very slim, narrow improvement policy for those who got a warning letter last year that they were, concerned about truancy.
Yeah, and he, obviously Mr. Miller can look at the language that's in our existing attendance policy and see if anything can be tweaked from that, just to comply with the regulation. That's my main concern. Anybody else have any comments about that issue that I raised?
I'm not a fan of incentives.
No, but the regulations require us to have something, and I don't know what incentive means. To me, it's not entering a lottery to win a bicycle. There needs to be perhaps an intangible incentive. I don't know, feeling good about school, whatever the wording is that will help us comply with the regulation without looking like we're running a sweepstakes in the school,
I'm also
or encouraging.
I'm also concerned about students who may have chronic illness, et cetera, and marginalizing them. And I'm just concerned about that.
Of course. So we have to balance that with what this regulation is saying we need to do.
Is it it says we have to do this? What does the sample policy mean?
The sample policy, it says, let me find where it was. It says the district is required by state regulations to include, quote, incentives to encourage student attendance, unquote, in its policy. And it says this should not come at the expense of attending school when ill and risk spreading that illness to others. And then it's additionally, a student should not be penalized for missing school when ill. So that's why I'm saying.
But can we make a broad statement, like a very general statement that basically, I think to Dr. Block's point, that we're not encouraging, under these certain conditions, but being within the regulation. So that's what I think your goal is.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Hopefully Howard Miller can help us balance that so that no child feels penalized for being unable to attend, but we comply with the regulation, and we're also not running a sweepstakes. That's find the whole child way to make us comply with state law. That's what I'm saying. Okay. All right, the next is under the section that says consequences of excessive ATEDS, and you'll notice there's no apostrophe there, which is correct. But in the following paragraph, there are apostrophes after ATED. So we could just take those out, please. In the next paragraph, it begins unexcused ATEDS. The last sentence says, however, absences related to homelessness will not result in negative consequences. We say earlier that being absent due to being homeless is an excused absence. We acknowledge that in that menu of enumerated excused absences. So do we need this sentence? It's redundant. In my opinion, it's redundant. It's important, but it's redundant because homelessness is listed as an enumerated excused absence. So I'm throwing that out there for consideration. Emily's giving it a thumbs up. Dr. Shields, I see Nan shaking her head in agreement. Yes.
We can remove that.
Okay. Great. Let's see. Under attendance and grade policy, which we don't have a grade policy, by the way, but that's at the end. In the second paragraph, it says unexcused ATEDS will affect a student's class participation grade for the marking period. And my question is, will unexcused ATEDS affect a student's class participation grade? Is that mandatory that it will affect the participation rate? I just want to make sure I understand.
Are you more comfortable with may?
Well, are we giving the teachers discretion for unexcused absences? In other words, if there is an unexcused absence early on, but the student.
I think the word may, I'm sorry, Deb, I think the word may flows better because in the first paragraph, we do say may be based on classroom participation, their final grade. So I think the word may probably fits better and probably just answers your question also, Deb. So
it gives the teacher discretion. In other words, if a student has an unexcused absence, but then pulls him or herself up by the bootstraps and is able to show improvement during the year, do we want to penalize that student? And conversely, so that was my thought. But as an administrator, Dr. Shields, what is your feeling of it? Are you okay with May?
You know, some teachers have a participation grade component to their calculation. Some teachers don't. So I think by changing it to may, you're giving the flexibility.
And that's okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Is everybody on the committee in agreement with that? I see Nan nodding yes. Dr. Block is okay with that. Okay. So we will change that to May. Thank you. Okay. Then 2 paragraphs. Oh, where am I? I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. Then we talk about the Port Washington and the 85%. I don't have any issue with that paragraph. That's picked up from the old policy. Then the next paragraph that begins to ensure that parents and students are aware, so forth and so on. The teacher or other designated staff member will advise the student and contact the parent at the appropriate intervals. In the template, it says we'll contact the parent by telephone and mail. But in our draft, the method of contact is omitted. Do we care? Do we need to spell out or, do we need to give a concrete device as to how the student and parent will be advised?
I would not recommend that.
Okay.
I think you want to give the flexibility to the staff on, it's important that they communicate. That's what the most important message is.
Okay. In the next paragraph, I have a note. It talks about, I don't know why I have a note here. Because I know that if there's a school-sponsored activity, the students arrange with their teachers to make up any work missed. I'm not sure why I have a note there, so I'm going to move on. Under annual review, it says the board will annually review building level student attendance records. I'm wondering, how does this get done? Like, I don't recall specifically doing this in the past. So how does the board review building level attendance records? Are we told by the principals where there are chronic issues? Because obviously we can't identify students, that invades the privacy. So as a procedural matter, how does this happen?
we should ask for a report, Deb. We should ask for a report mid-year. And I think we said we would be asking for some similar type of reporting. So I think we can get a report that shows if there's any absentee issues.
And do we want to specify that within the policy? Do we want to say by asking for a report? Because remember, this policy has to outlive us.
I think saying we will annually review building level, I think that's enough. I mean, what if the next board annually reviews it in a board meeting and not in a report that they get? I mean, this is, again, outliving us. What if, I don't know, they do it I think it's fine if we just leave it like that.
Okay. Everybody okay with that? All right, good. All right. So now we're just down to the cross-reference. Our code of conduct is 5144.1. So we just need to add that little 0.1. I think a student discipline is 5144. And then my question, which I raised in either March or April of 2020, when the pandemic hit and everybody was sent home and we were trying to figure out how to handle third and fourth quarter grades. I raised the issue that we do not have a grading policy in the district. And this NISPA policy references policy number 4710. And NISPA does have a sample that was put out around 2016. Manhasset has a grading policy under this number 4710. Syosset has a grading policy under 4710. And I realize this is a new issue that I'm raising, and I don't know if people have had time to think about it, but do we as a board, does this committee think that we should have a grading policy? And I could provide the samples so that we could look at those policies and make a more educated determination. Yes, we like this. We think we should have something like this. Let's think about it.
Can I suggest, can I just suggest that you put it on the November 17th agenda then, so that you have the policy shared on board docs and allow the conversation?
Of course. So that's what I'm saying. Do we want to say right now, no, we're not even interested in it, don't bother? Or is it something we should explore in the future?
I'd like to have that conversation.
Okay, great. So Dr. Shields, for the November, so now we know in November we have at least one new thing to discuss. And so that would be the grading policy. Those were my, I think that was all I had. Those were my comments and questions. Yeah, that does it for my pink highlights. Oh, I had one more thing. I'm sorry. In our old policy, we had a list of bullets as to what were invalid excuses for absences. So in the new policy, we enumerate the things that we acknowledge are excused, and I guess everything else is unexcused. But in the old policy, we actually gave examples as to specifically what is unexcused. For example, visiting relatives or friends, cutting class, vacation and travel, babysitting, working, shopping, oversleeping. Why were those omitted? And do we want to include those so that students and parents have very concrete examples of what the district will not tolerate as an absence, as in, Dr. Shields, your thoughts?
I think that's a philosophical question. I think in the top of page 2, under excused and unexcused absences, what they do is they define what is excused, and we're going to add in doctor and dental appointments that can't be arranged outside of the day. And then their final sentence is that all other absences are considered unexcused. So they don't go to the inverse. They just say what's the positive.
Right, and our old attendance policy, we did go to the inverse, which in my mind, I consider it instructive. So the parents have very concrete, because these are very common reasons why kids are not in school. They're going on vacation, they're visiting relatives, they're oversleeping. And so I didn't know if it would be helpful to include something such as unexcused absence. Examples of unexcused absences include bullet, 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 and pull that from our old policy.
We can put that in, of course. We can put that in between paragraph 1 and 2 of that section.
I think we should. I think we should be as concrete in what we will not tolerate as to what we will tolerate. I mean, I understand all other, everything else on here is not, but we do have that, or such other reasons as may be approved by the appropriate building administrator. And a building administrator should not approve vacation as an excused absence or shopping. There should be notice on both sides, I think, on the district side and on the parent community side. Does anybody have any objection to my
Well,
point?
I have a question,
Yes?
which is, what is the, if I call up and say that my mom is taking my kids shopping today, and so they're not going to be in school, and the school tells me that's an unexcused absence, like, what is the consequence of that? Like, what is the consequence of unexcused absences? Because it doesn't seem like there can be much of a consequence particularly unless they're excessive, right? Like, if there are 25 of those a year, that's one thing. If there's one or two, to me, that seems like childhood.
Well, my understanding is the teacher is not obligated to assist the child in making up the work. They may say, okay, you have to go get it from your classmate. The teacher does not have to give the student a missed test or exam during an unexcused absence, and it may result in the participation grade being affected.
Got it. Okay. Well, that
But
is
I'm reading
clear
just from the
what
policy.
consequence is. But in reality, I think many parents that I know will lie and do lie. So I think this is a bit of a moot point. They see what's excused, and nobody is testing nobody is checking whether the kid went to a family event. So like when my nephew had his bris, right? We pulled my kids out of school, right? And I think that's an excused absence, but there's not really much of a difference between that and that and going shopping in terms of what the school is. So we're just going to, so I think it is mostly a moot point.
Yeah, if I can give you a little insight into having reviewed this data as a principal, attendance records can tell a story about a child's poor performance or contribute to that story of poor performance. So, if it's 5 absences in a year, that's one story. If it's 35 absences in a year and 70% of them are unexcused, that tells another story. So I think it does give the principal or the teacher some insight into maybe what the child's attendance is impacting on their grades and their performance in the classroom. And that can sometimes be helpful in a conversation with the family because you can pull up the attendance records for multiple years on a child and share that with a family and say, look, you may or may not be aware, but this is choices. Some of them are choices that you and your family have made. And this may be contributing to how your child's struggling. So it does sometimes help with that dialogue with families.
Okay, that's helpful. So you think that there are parents that are just like, well, my kid's not going to be in school, and they don't even bother to create a made up reason for the absence that is excused?
Yeah, but there are some parents that are straight up and tell us exactly that they're going to Aruba a week early because the flights are a lot cheaper.
Okay.
And then you just make note of that. And if the child's not an academic risk child moving forward, then you're right. It's sort of a moot point. But sometimes that child's, in AIS classes and having trouble performing on grade level. And then you can say, hey, you might want to rethink that early flight next time.
Okay, Nan?
I just wanted to, maybe if we were going to include that list of unexcused, that we might also add the word examples of, so that they don't think that it is the exhausted list.
Right. Okay. Does anybody else have any comments about the draft attendance policy? Okay, see, Nan, your hand's still up, but that's not. Okay, so seeing none, we'll make those revisions and bring it back and also speak to Howard Miller about the incentive issue. Okay, the next is item 1.4, visitors to the schools.
So this was brought back to the committee. You may recall last month we had a conversation around not so much the policy, but you asked me to make some edits to the regulation. And while the regulation is not necessarily the purview of a board committee, I did make some edits because you'd asked that you could see them. So those edits are here. You'll notice that I added bullet 5 and bullet 6. I believe it describes the language that we had discussed last month. Number 5 on the regulation says candidates for elections should not be in our schools during election season to promote their candidacy. That was a point you wanted to make sure the schools knew. And then number 6, visitors may only take photos and videos with permission from district staff. There was concern that visitors might be taking either of those without anyone knowing.
Any comments or questions? Okay, my question in paragraph 5, candidates for election should not be in our schools or are not permitted in our schools to promote their, are we saying that they are not allowed in our schools at all during election season, or we're not permitting them to promote their candidacy? I want to be really clear in this paragraph. Emily, I know this was your concept, and I agree with it. Are you okay with the language in paragraph 5?
I am. I'm okay. I think again, I'm trying to be mindful of the, first of all, this is regulation. So this is what the schools put in place. But I just am trying to remind us that, you know, when we do these policies, we are as a board the bigger picture. And so I don't think we should get too minute in how we word things. So I'm okay. I think a principal or anyone an administrator reading this would understand that they don't want anybody, you know, on school property campaigning. I'm okay with this.
And
I was trying to find the balance in the language because I did hear members of this committee saying that they do want to encourage elected officials coming into the school and talking about what they do for a living. So I was trying to find that balance. They can be in the schools, but they should not be in there promoting their candidacy. And that's a fine line that we would need to walk with them.
okay, Adam?
It was really just that. It was really just that point. I want to make sure that we don't eliminate opportunities.
Okay. All right, so since this is regulation, we don't need to put it on for first reading. We just need to say thank you and move on. Okay. Everybody okay with that before I move on? Yes? Okay. The next.
Wait, just a point though, the policy, we should just write that it's been updated because we did discuss it. So I think the last time it says it's updated is a while ago. So just do a regular update. Okay.
May 2019, so we'll just do reviewed.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just write that down. And now we're going on to advisory committees to the Board of Education.
So Ms. Brooks, this was brought to this committee
By me.
at the request of the board.
Can
Yes.
I ask, Deb, can I jump in for a minute since I did bring this up? So we do have a policy which is from 1992. It's basically a one-liner or one paragrapher. We did find the NISBA policy or the NISBA, I think the Citizens Advisory Committee policy, which is the policy 2000, I guess, or 2260 is their policy. And so Deb, I know I'm okay with this. And I think that this is a policy that we should probably use, my opinion. And That's it. So I think if you were asking like which policy, but I think this NISBA policy is the right way we should go about it.
Okay, so in the NISBA policy, the newer version, not the older version. And the difference between the newer version and the older version, I think the newer version has a paragraph at the end that talks about the citizens advisory committees for the staff. But on the first page of the NISBA template, under citizens advisory committees to the board, the third paragraph.
Wait, which one? The old one or the new one?
I'm sorry, the new one.
So yeah, I don't think we need citizens advisory committees for the staff. So I think that's not, we don't have that. And I don't think that's,
Right.
I mean, we don't, so I think we should get rid of that part. I'm
Right.
just saying so we should end it right before citizens advisory committee for the staff.
So I guess my question is, which template did you want to adopt? Because in the newer version, it talks about, in the third paragraph, the turnover of at least 1/3 of the members, with no member serving more than 3 consecutive years, and that the chairperson of the advisory committee should be chosen from among the lay members and not be a board member, so forth and so on. It's likewise been a policy board member shall not be official members of advisory committees. So
Yeah, that's not a
which,
good idea.
right, so I'm asking which template then do you want us to use? Because that was in the newer template.
Right. So it's the older template.
So you want to go with the older template?
That's how we've been used. That's what I believe how we've worked.
Okay. I just, and the older template does not limit the term of each of the committee members. I just want to make sure.
Right, because I think what we want to do, and my suggestion is that every citizen advisory committee will be different, right? And I think it then goes to the citizen advisory committee's charter. So each citizen advisory committee should have a charter, and in that committee's charter, there should be the rules of, how many members, how long a term is. So I think it should be left up to each committee to decide how, because it'll be unique based on the makeup of the committee or the work that they're doing. Do you see where I'm going? So I don't think we should have an overall rule, but it should be left to specific committee members, the charters of each committee, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to be sure that we're all on board with what's on board docs identified as the older version, as is. Any comments from the committee? Okay. We also have a policy that is 1210, which I have included here, which is from 1992, and it seems to me that it's redundant. I think it's probably just forgotten about over 30 years ago. Anybody
Right.
have a
So
problem?
I think 2260 should replace 1210.
Well,
Because it says citizen
1210 I think
advisory committee.
right, I think 1210 should be deleted.
Right,
because-
that's what I mean.
Oh, okay.
Right. 2260 replaces 1210, which means 1210 is deleted,
Okay.
right? That's
Okay.
my opinion. That's my opinion.
And I'm going to, yes, mine as well. I'm going to ask the rest of the committee or the committee. Nan is nodding her head in agreement. Adam? He's good. Okay, good.
Brooks, can I just clarify? I want to make sure Cindy has what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is we're going to take what you're describing as the older draft from NISBA, and that at the top of the draft has check mark local and notice.
Yes. It says, it's in board docs that says old version. It
Okay.
says it. Yeah.
Very good. I just want to make sure that we're,
Yes, thank you.
we're moving forward on the older version
Right.
just as is, and we're eliminating
Policy
1210
1210. Right.
and taking the language from the NISBA old version and dropping it into the new 2260.
Correct. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, great. Okay, next on the agenda is community 1.6, and that's community relations goals. Okay, this was brought up by a board member as part of our wish list. And it pretty much aligned with our previous policy 1000. The language is identical, but for the fact that this draft, this NISPA template doesn't have bullets, and I think we should add bullets because it's kind of difficult to read. And my only other, first of all, does anybody on the committee have any comments about this? No. Okay. So my only other observation is, I guess about, so 8 lines down where it's talking about handling all complaints. This would be in bulleted form, it would be easier to read, but it says handle all complaints from the public by the staff member in charge. They're basically talking about our chain of command policy. So then I would say as identified in the district's communication guidelines and pursuant to our chain of command policy. And then we can omit the line that says, however, such complaints may be carried to the superintendent if the problem cannot be solved at that level, because that is the procedure within our chain of command policy. Does everybody see what I mean? And having just revised that policy last year, it's unfortunately still fresh in my brain, so.
Deb, I have a quick question. So I'm looking at the community relations goals. Is that different than like a policy? That's like right, like there are 2 documents in the board docs. One is community relation goals in Port Washington. I just reread it and it looks pretty good.
Well, the one that's from Port Washington is from 1992.
Okay.
And the other one is the updated NISPA template from 2020, 2019-ish. And the one from NISPA has everything that our policy has, everything. It duplicates the bullet points in our current policy, but adds a little bit more, builds upon it.
Okay.
And what we tried to do, what we set out last year, was to try to align our policies with the NISPA policies as much as possible. And also in terms of the content of the policies, obviously tailored to what we need for our district. And their policy isn't the Bible, but it's a good guideline. And also in terms of numbering, because the numbers have changed over the years. And you'll see that our policy is from, what did I say, 30 years ago. 30? Yeah. So, but that's my only comment. But Dr. Shields, what do you think about, in the sense that talks about the district's communication guidelines and pursuant to the chain of command policies, and then taking out the following line and bulleting all of these points to make it easier to read?
I agree with you. I think the bullets are very important because it is very hard to read. I think what you're talking about in that bullet is handle all complaints from the public by the staff member closest to the complainant as identified in the chain of command policy.
Great. And then taking out the following sentence because it's redundant of what's in the policy.
Yeah, I agree. Cindy, were you able to get that?
Can you just repeat the first part?
So it says,
Handle.
we're keeping what's in there is the handle all complaints from the public by the staff member. We're keeping that, but then we're eliminating in charge of the unit of the school district organization. And then we're keeping closest to the complainant as identified in the district's chain of command policy.
Okay, thank you.
And then we're eliminating the following bullet that begins with however and ends with level.
Yes, thank you.
And then at the end of the policy, we would just want to drop in our whatever chain of command policies we thought were relevant as a cross-reference. Any comments on that by any committee members? No? Okay. So now the fun stuff, evaluation of school board operational procedures.
Can I just interrupt? Is this going on for first reading?
Well, I think we should just, I guess we could, it's minor revisions. We could always double check it during the first read to make sure it's okay. As long as it has the bullets and that one bullet revised and the cross references adopted. See, there's nothing major of substance. Everybody okay with that? Dr. Hines, hello.
Good morning. My apologies. I was two different Nassau County meetings this morning, so I'm glad you're still meeting right now.
Oh yeah, we're good. We're good. Okay. So item 1.7 is evaluation of school board operational procedures. So this was raised as part of our wish list as well this year. We shouldn't just rip everybody else apart. We should have some really important self-reflection on what we do and how we do it. And so, I thought I had, oh yes, so sorry about that. Our current policy is again pretty old. The template is, I think, better than the current policy that we have. Let me just see. Sorry. It's really up to the board, the committee members, whether they want to adopt that. And the exhibit that I provided is a very extensive checklist of self-reflection in terms of it outlines our relationship with the superintendent, how we're doing on policy making, district planning, staff and personnel relationships, relationship to financial management, all the relationship to instructional program, all the community relationships. I could just go through. There are basically 68 items of self-reflection. I don't know if that's overkill. And obviously it would take some time, I think, to review this, but it does give us an idea of things we should be thinking about in terms of who we are and what we do. Because I know we have an extensive checklist regarding the superintendent and who he, she is and what he, she is supposed to do. So this was brought to my attention by a committee member, and I open it up to the committee for comments. Adam?
So I don't think I'm going to be popular in this opinion, but that, as you all know me, has never stopped me from saying things before. I have yet to see an effective self-reflection. And so my concern is spending a lot of time to sort of evaluate ourselves is not a particularly good use of time. So, you know, the difference between the evaluation of the superintendent is that we're a separate body. It's not a self-evaluation. The difference between the superintendent evaluating, let's say, you know, the cabinet or the principals evaluating the teacher is it's a separate person. So I'm not going to be supportive of self-evaluation, not because I don't think we should be evaluated, but I think that we are not particularly capable, and anyone is not very capable of evaluating themselves.
Emily, are you off mute because you wanted to speak?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
because I just wanted to remind the board that it is one of our goals this year to do a self-evaluation and to evaluate our process. So just my recommendation for this committee is that this committee maybe takes this discussion to the greater Board of Education meeting so that we can have maybe a more full in-depth conversation on this. I think, Deborah, the NISBA policy that has been put up on board docs and the checklist that you provided is more of a, if kind of like a regulation almost, right? So the policy would be that we're going to be evaluating, and then this is how we'll be evaluating, would be like the checklist is how I would see it. But I think I understand what Dr. Block is saying, and I understand that he thinks, the self-evaluation part is not necessarily what we should be putting any our time and energy on. However, we have committed as a board to be more reflective of the work that we do and how we perform. So, but not crossing any of this discussion, I think maybe if this is something that we want to debate, we should bring it to the general board meeting and have this discussion, okay? Because I don't want us to get into a whole quorum kind of situation here, since I'm chiming in.
And I think that because it involves the whole board, I was actually going to say that this should be a broader discussion. This template, I don't know if you can see from the heading, is from the Ossining School District. It just happened to be part of what NISBA has posted within its policy services. So this is something that, at least as of 2007, that school district had sought to undertake. Doesn't mean it's right for Port Washington. It's simply an example that we can follow to the number, pick and choose. It doesn't really matter.
So I don't know if we'll be able to discuss it at this next coming meeting, but then we should put it on the meeting after that. But I think that, like, I agree with you that there should be a discussion amongst the entire board, since this, and then probably the next one that you also have,
The accountability.
yeah, right, the school board powers. I mean, I don't know, like, if there's going to be discussions on whether or not it should be clearly this committee can make its recommendation, but maybe you want to take this to a bigger conversation.
Committee members, thoughts?
I'm good with tabling it. And I just want to be clear, I'm not opposed to being evaluated. If there was some way to have someone other than ourselves evaluate ourselves, I'm certainly very open to that. But so that's all I'll say on it, and happy to table to talk about it with the rest of the board.
Adam, I was going to give you a gold star. Now you're not getting one. See, if I was evaluating.
I said we should wait.
He's bringing it to the full board.
No.
He's doing what you recommended.
No. When he was saying, I don't want to be, if somebody else evaluated me, I'd be better. I'm like, I was going to give you a gold star.
Nan?
I was going to say that perhaps I know that part of our district's goals is to conduct a climate survey, and I would hope in that climate survey there would be material and content directly related to the Board of Ed functioning as seen by the community, which I think would be a very wonderful evaluation.
Can I jump in? I think that's a great idea. That is who we report to. So that is who should be evaluating us.
Okay, so we will bring that thought to the larger group as well. Okay, so we'll find a time, hopefully in the not too distant future, to put it on our regular meeting agenda. Understanding it may not make it onto the next one. But I leave that up to the people who are formulating the agenda as president. Okay, the next is, are we finished with that one? We understand we are tabling it as a committee and kicking it into the full board. Okay. The next is 1.8 school board powers and duties. So again, the wish list of the committee was to try to update what our powers and responsibilities are. So I had provided a NISPA template and also an exhibit. And from my review, our existing policy 2110 basically is repeated by the current NISPA policy. So even though our policy is from 1991, I feel comfortable adopting the NISPA policy because it's basically the same thing, just brought into the 21st century. The only thing that was deleted, I think, from between our policy and the NISPA policy is that we had a paragraph, the third paragraph of our existing policy that talks about in carrying out its functions, board has the power to issue contracts, et cetera, et cetera. That seems to have been incorporated into the exhibit that I have provided, the NISPA template, where it talks about standards of governance, the educational program, administration personnel, fiscal management, so forth and so on. So in reading this, I thought it would be good to adopt the current NISPA policy as well as the NISPA exhibit, which doesn't bind us as a policy, but it does give examples as to what our powers and responsibilities are, rather than just this one little paragraph that's been deleted. Thoughts? Everybody's thinking? Does that mean you're all in agreement with me, or you're thinking, or you want to have a chance to review it and talk about it next time?
I'm looking at my notes. I had some things highlighted here. There are just some details of this that I thought needed clarification. So
on the template
on
exhibit or the template policy?
On the exhibit. So in the educational program section, adopt a strategic plan for implementing the district's vision or mission, incorporating individual schools' goals and objectives, indicators of progress, and systems of program evaluation. I have yet to understand if we have such a thing as a system of program evaluation. So I'm just concerned that if we adopt that, do we have such a thing?
Who can answer that question?
I think we're evaluating programs in a few different ways.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think, we have a curriculum office that's evaluating academic programs. We have a committee of professional growth and curriculum development that looks at specific items that come up in our practice. So I think we do evaluate, of course. It just depends where it sits.
And there are places that we aren't currently evaluating that we will be. So I think that's accurate as well.
Okay. Another question on administration and personnel. Establish and adopt policies regarding staff recruitment development. Do we have a policy on professional development?
I would have to do some more research on that.
Okay. And that was my last question.
Okay, the exhibit is obviously very extensive. Do we want to put this on again, on the agenda again for next month, and give everybody an opportunity to really comb through this thoroughly and make sure we're comfortable with the NISPA policy?
Can I just
As
get,
the-
can I just get an understanding? Are you recommending that in lieu of our current school board policy that we have, which school board powers and duties, we change it to the one that NISBA has done and include the exhibit as well?
Yes, because the NISBA, the one that NISBA has is almost word for word what our existing policy is, except for that third paragraph that's been taken out, where it talks about the power to issue contracts.
So why would we, what is the purpose of including the exhibit is my question, I guess, to the committee.
Well, my understanding is that it gives examples of what our powers are. It enumerates them. It doesn't, it reminds us what we're supposed to be doing and what we can be doing.
Okay. I mean, I think some of the questions that some of the committee members have asked with regards to, does this exist? I mean, we do not have policies that I know of on, to Nan's questions about termination of employees or whatever, what the exhibit was talking about. So whatever, I forget the line, I have to go back. We don't have a staff recruitment policy or a development, evaluation, discipline, and termination of employment. There is no board policy that I'm aware of. And maybe there are, but I don't think so. There is a termination policy, no, I think. Anyway, I'm babbling, but what I'm saying is, I think this is getting into very specific information that if we do put up an exhibit, then I think we should have the coordinating documentation in place for it. So I guess there's a bigger question of, is the policy just not enough? And if maybe the updated policy from NISBA, which you said is more, brings it into more the 20th century, maybe that's just enough and we don't need to have an exhibit. But again, this is a philosophical, I guess, discussion.
Well, we could also, oh, Dr. Shields, did you want to speak?
Oh, I'm okay.
We could also ask our attorneys if they feel that the exhibit hamstrings us, or is whether it in its totality is appropriate for our school district, or if there are some things in it that aren't appropriate for our school district and our board functioning. How do you feel about that?
I think that's a good idea.
Okay. So
I reviewed the exhibit. I think it's actually a pretty nice list of the powers as I understand them. And I think you can sort of open it up in a way that says, which is how they do it. It says example of powers, and then it's pretty comprehensive, right? It's communication, it's administrative, it's fiscal. So I feel comfortable with it being used as an example of powers so that people can really understand what the powers of the board are.
The truth of the matter is, this might be better to not be embedded in a policy, but we do have a Board of Education page on our website, and it says, what is a board member responsible for, or what is the role of the board? It might be better to just include this exhibit as, the types of things the board does on, if we want to make it so that we all know what the role of the board is. I mean, so maybe it belongs not as part of our policy, but something that we do put up on our website as the types of things the board members do, or the power that the board can do, and the types of things. Because again, if it's part of our policy, I think, maybe I'm wrong, I think we would have to make sure that we have coordinating policies that go with all of these exhibits. And I don't know that we have those, but if we put it on as this is the role of the board, as an example of the types of jobs or the types of things that board members are responsible for, then it doesn't.
I think that's fair. I guess the question is, because I don't want this to be a comprehensive list, but I do like that it's a very clear example. And so the only question that I have is, are there other exhibits, or would this be the only exhibit in the policies? In which case that's not a thing, that's not the right way to do it.
I don't think we have exhibits anywhere. So that's why
Okay.
I'm asking. There are no exhibits. That's why I'm saying, what's the purpose of an actual exhibit? Does it do anything? I think we have regulations, right? Policies, and then there's regulations. The regulations are set forth by the administration. The policies are set forth by the Board of Education. So that's why I was trying to say, is this a regulation? If that's I think, again, we can absolutely take this to a bigger discussion also, but this to me sounds more like a conceptual, this is the duties of the board, or these the types of things board members are involved with or responsible for. And I would feel comfortable putting that on our district webpage under the Board of Education page, because that would really be a good example of the work we do.
We do have exhibits in some policies, but I understand your point about putting this on the school board page. I think it's a good compromise. But I also think that we should, and so we can run through. So if we don't have to send it to Howard Miller, we can run through as a board and say, do we have a policy for termination? Do we have a policy for tenure? Do we? And then we can flesh that out among us, and put it on our webpage. Is that what you're saying, Emily? So we don't have to burden Howard with it then. But in the meantime,
Again, this is the overall, remember, we bring this as a committee back to the general Board of Education.
yes,
Right? So this is definitely a discussion that we ask the entire board how they would like the committee
Yes.
to proceed, right? Or the recommendation that the committee is making, and if they have changes.
thank you very much for reminding me.
I'm reminding
Bring in the
myself
old one.
because I'm speaking, and I'm trying to not speak, but but I am a de facto member of the board of the committee.
Is everybody comfortable with adopting the NISBA policy itself template and putting that on for a first read? It's just the template, not the exhibit. The template of the policy, not the exhibit. So put the policy on for a first read, the exhibit we bring back to the full board for a discussion.
Yes.
Okay, good. We have unanimous agreement. Okay, school board powers. And now the last item, you didn't think I'd get to this, did you? Communication among individual board members was another policy that was on the wish list. The district does not currently have a policy about this. We've kind of been schooled in it by, we had somebody from NISBA come and speak to us last year. It's part of understanding the open meetings laws. You'll see from the template, it's not required. It's not even local. It's more of a notice, but just helping school board members. And we even have it, I think, in our procedural manual, but it's to help school board members understand from NISBA's perspective what we can and cannot do and say when we're not in a meeting. Are we allowed to speak to each other? If it doesn't involve a deliberation, a vote, or any type of action. And so also reminds us about, and the community as well, about the Freedom of Information law. So throwing this out to the committee to see if it's something we want to recommend to the entire board that we adopt as a notice. Nan, you're unmuted. Does that mean you want to speak?
No.
Any thoughts?
Ms. Brooks, didn't we have a conversation around this type of topic last year at some point?
We did, and I don't know if it was, I don't know what it was in relation to. I don't know if it was in relation to a policy. I know when we talked about social media, we talked about having to be careful about what we said on social media, because if too many of us join into a conversation, do we run afoul of the open meetings laws? Are we holding a virtual board meeting on Facebook, that type of thing? Do you have a different recollection?
No, I appreciate you're trying to, Cindy, do you have any reference to that? I remember this conversation was held last year, and we got some input from Howard Miller on the topic. I don't know if it resulted in a revision of a policy. For some reason, I think it did, because I remember we spent a good bit of time on it. I think we can definitely look that up for you and bring that back to the committee. I know it's hard to put Cindy on the spot for the history of the committee.
Yeah, I would have to look. I would have to go back.
I'm trying to remember when that might have happened. The only thing that's coming to my mind is social media. And
Yes, that was, you're
Yeah.
right. It was a lively discussion. I remember Trustee Gilliar, had some clear opinions on when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate. And it was at this committee level, I believe.
Yes. As a general concept, what does the committee think about this? Is that it's not required, it's not even local, it's just a notice. Do we cover this sufficiently within our operating handbook? I would actually have to go in and look. Yeah, we have a section called communication between board members. But I don't know that we really talk about, we do talk about the fact that communications must not conflict with or circumvent the open meeting law. Cindy, I'm reading from this handbook, and just so the public knows, through board development, the board devised this handbook as kind of a procedural manual, a very informal yet formal procedural manual, as the Bible of how we're supposed to operate and comply with all the laws. And have our own internal procedures, how we email each other, how we email the superintendent, how we decide the agenda, just the internal nitty gritty. And within that, we do say we shouldn't run afoul of the open meetings law, but this is actually for the public to see and for the public to know that we know what our constraints are and how we're supposed to operate. So again, this is a NISPA template. So is there any thought about having this as part of our policy rather than just our internal procedures, but a policy? Adam?
So I don't think the NISPA policy is very clear at all. I'm reading it and I don't really understand it at all. So I am not going to support us adopting it. It just doesn't seem to say very much. Like, it doesn't say very much that the regulation doesn't say.
Well, it helps guide us in terms of when what is confusing you. Maybe we could get, or maybe we can ask.
It's too complicated. It doesn't say anything really. In reality, all it is that board members, when they're in a quorum, cannot vote or deliberate on board business. Right? That's what it says in this 2-page document that I found very confusing to read. So I don't think it really adds to, I don't think it really helps the public in any way. And it doesn't really address any of the sticky questions that we deal with a lot, which is, can we meet socially? Can we discuss items? How do we get a sense of the board? Can we send an email back to each other that, talks about an issue? It doesn't talk about any of that. So I don't see the value of adding this dense policy to our already set of dense policies. And I find the policies that we have, they're usually pretty clear cut and crisp. So I think this is not NISPA's best work.
And Nan?
I see the value in actually having something on paper that describes what rules we should be abiding by in terms of open meetings law. And I think having that available for the public to see and understand what those rules and parameters are would be helpful. If this is not the one, maybe, we table it and talk about it in more detail, maybe with the full board again, and since it really does involve all 7 of us. But I do see the value of having something for ourselves and the public to have available.
Anybody else? Dr. Shields, Dr. Hines, do you have any feelings one way or the other about this policy? My feeling is I think it's important to have something like this on the book so the public knows that we know how we're supposed to behave. Again, it's not required, it's not local, it's just the notice. Maybe it could be reworded in a way that's not as confusing. It's 2 pages because of all the highlighted stuff that NISBA says to help explain it. That obviously all would.
So can I just make a recommendation? Because I think to Adam Block's point, I think if you're reading just the policy, so not the highlighted part, but just from the part that says the Board of Education recognizes its responsibility, what Adam is saying is that there's nothing really, doesn't really answer any of the dilemmas that may occur. But if you were to incorporate the stuff that's in gray, that is highlighted into this policy, then I think it would give it more meat about being a little bit more specific on how we vote, or like where it says individual communications, whether by memo, telephone, often serve as a means of acquiring or exchanging information, knowledge, and expertise. So I think this is the part where I think, Adam, you were saying, this is where we kind of get into sometimes discuss and get the warning from, typically for me, no meeting, right? So maybe if we're incorporating a little bit more detail into the policy, it could be a little bit more valid for, I don't know. Do you see what I'm saying, Adam?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I want to know what I saw this policy. I was like, oh, good. It's going to tell me what I can do. And then I read it and I was like, it didn't tell me anything that I can do or can't do.
Well, so if you were to go to the gray where it says voting, action, and or deliberation by a board member may only occur at a meeting, right? So that basically gives you that's what you can do.
Sure.
Right?
I know I can't vote if we're not
Right.
at a meeting.
But also the fact about the physical records, including, remember, we've including our emails and that, or those are all for board. Like, I mean, maybe, Deborah, maybe
That's all said below. But yeah,
right, I know, but maybe the suggestion is to send this to our attorneys and ask them if they think this is something that they could, since we did actually spend a board development with them earlier this year, maybe they could give us some feedback on if there's a way to make this a little bit more comprehensive, or if in fact we do need it. So maybe it is more, something that is more procedural or part of the training that we get when we go through board training, but maybe we send this to the attorneys.
Okay, and with the instructions that they need to have this be more concrete and make more.
I would ask them first, do they think we need it? And should we have one? And if so, is there a way to make it a little bit more detailed or more, again, I remind us that the policies are supposed to be not as concrete or minute or, if this, then that, because they're supposed to be a bigger picture type of, but let's get their feedback.
Yeah, but where this is concerned, there is no bigger picture when you're violating the open meetings laws, right? So there are specific things that we need to know, because sometimes as a new board member, I think nobody intends to violate the public officers law, at least among the 7 of us and in prior boards. But sometimes you forget, you're so accustomed to doing something, you don't even stop to think, oh my goodness, this might be in violation, or I shouldn't be discussing this in the supermarket or whatever it is. So, or after a board meeting when there are 4 of us still congregating. So I think this just serves as a good reminder, but we'll talk to the attorneys. Nan and Adam, are you comfortable giving it to the attorneys for them to help us with?
I certainly am. I mean,
Okay, good.
Howard is the one that tells us, oh, don't do this, otherwise you will violate it. and he has an understanding of it, and for him to be able to help better translate that onto paper, which I don't personally don't think NISBA does a very good job of, I am all for.
Okay, great. And then you're shaking your head, yes. And mindful of the time, we have no public attendees. So unless somebody has sent an email with a public comment, I don't see that at all. And so I'm going to be mindful of everybody's time. Say I will see you November 17th. Happy Halloween. Happy Diwali. What else?
Happy Unity Day. Unity Day.
Unity Day.
Oh, yes.
Unity Day.
Unity Day, Diwali. Don't forget to vote, and we'll see you on the 17th.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.